In this topic, we are looking at NTP, or Network Time Protocol. Most of us already know that generally this is used for our synchronization of time between our network infrastructure, and this is extremely important due to logging. Most of the time when we are going back and checking our logs, it's all going to be in a chronological order, and if we have a device that isn't synchronized, whether it's 5 minutes behind or an hour behind, it's obviously going to make it very difficult to detect if there is an issue with a specific device. So an attacker could certainly try to change the time of one of our devices if it might be throwing errors, and hey, we're not looking at errors from a year ago. Also, it's important for digital certificate validation, any type of single sign-on that might require anything that's time-based. And generally, rule of thumb, when we look at our enterprise NTP architecture, we are usually selecting a pair of network core devices that are going to be basically acting as though they are the servers. Since this is a client server model, they might be the servers for our entire private infrastructure, and then they're acting as clients to maybe an atomic clock or GNSS reference clock outside of our organization. So those are a couple different ways to do it. Keep in mind, every hop that we are away from stratum 0 being the most trusted, we are either a stratum of 1 if we're 1 hop away, or stratum of 2 if we're 2 hops away, so on and so forth. So we'll be able to verify that with our show NTP associations and things like that. Another choice is we can also be redundant with our Windows domain controller. So if we want our network infrastructure to have the same time as our server infrastructure, we can do that as well. We can have a local NTP server. We have public NTP servers. Ensure that you are always using trusted NTP servers. Seeing as this is a security class, we want to make sure that we're at least getting our time from an accurate source. So again, here's sort of that concept of every hop away, you're increasing your stratum. So a couple other things that we might need to configure are things like time zones, or we are going to look at authentication, so we're going to need to know that configuration. It's also recommended that we use NTP. We don't want to be manually configuring our clocks. Also, if we have our Cisco FMC that can't directly reach an NTP server, or if we just don't have an NTP server, we should make sure that we aren't using our virtual Cisco FMC, and or that Cisco FMC as NTP isn't recommended. All right, so you can certainly use a different NTP server if possible, and dive into that in more detail in the courseware if that's something that's a concern of yours. So let's look at authentication. The whole reason why we have this, right, is because a hacker can easily behind a rogue host and pretend to be a legitimate NTP server. So if he's changing the time of an NTP device, again, when we go to check our logs, we are not seeing things that we should be seeing. So NTP does use encoded keys, and we are going to be decrypting the password and making sure that it matches on both sides, so that we can ensure that we are getting our time from the proper device. So if we don't already know the command to set the NTP server, it's just that NTP server command, and sometimes we have to give it a little bit of time to make sure that we've associated our time with that device, but you can double check and verify that it comes up before you set up authentication, and then go in and set up authentication. So first we want to enable it. Second, we want to specify the key. So here we're using key number 1, the MD5 hash, and obviously this is not the best password, so make sure you put a good password in there. Then go ahead and use that NTP server command one more time of that 200.123, but also reference the key that you just created on the previous step. So key number 1 or key number 2, so on and so forth. And then you also want to make sure that you are specifying this as an NTP trusted key. So after we've gotten all that set up, we just want to do our show NTP status, make sure that your clock is synchronized. You can also see what the stratum is. You can see what the reference IP is, so what is the IP address of the server. And we can also do a show NTP associations detail to see if we are using authentication and if we are currently authenticated. And here is the output of our show NTP association. So what is the IP? Generally, the asterisk or star means system peer. The tilde just means that it's been configured. And then we also see some examples on the Cisco ESA. We can go into the system admin and then the time settings, click edit and specify the IP address of your NTP server. And then of course, if we want to go in and make any modifications to our time zones, we can set that and submit and commit those changes.